Thank you. So yeah, I'm really happy to attend the workshop and present you the effects of controllability on human learning that we've been getting these past few years. And of course, I want to thank Athena, Javier, Tom, and Kino, who's not here, for having me. So we conducted this work, like I'm going to start with the acknowledgement. So we conducted this work with members of my team at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris on the left, and with the support of these long-term collaborators outside of my lab. So the work starts from the very trivial premise that under uncertainty, efficient decision-making requires at least two things. First, identifying the cause of incoming sensory inputs, like when driving under heavy rain, right? But second, it also requires to evaluate the consequences of possible actions, like choosing Brexit a few years ago. Like, for example, one consequence is like very endless queues at non-EU passport checks at Lisbon Airport, right? And so in the lab, we as a field study these two types of decision problems using very different tasks. For example, some of you may study perceptual decisions using these nicely controlled and ambiguous visual stimuli that subjects have to categorize. Others study reward-guided decisions using essentially endless variants of the bandit task, where subjects have to maximize rewards by choosing one of two possible or multiple actions, right? And so when you ask someone in the field, what is the core difference between these two types of decisions, you get very often the same answer, which is that for perceptual decisions, the evidence signal that you use to make your decision is an immediate sensory signal. By contrast, when you make a reward-guided decisions, the evidence that you're using is a value signal that you've shaped, that you've constructed over time, right? Today, I'm not going to focus on this. I think there is another core difference that distinguishes these two types of decisions that I want to focus on today. It is that in perceptual decisions, the evidence that you're looking at, you're basically observing cues in the environment to make your decision, right? In reward-guided decisions, what you're using to make your future decisions are basically outcomes of your past decisions. In other words, you're not in control of the evidence that is provided to you during perceptual decision-making tasks, whereas you are in control of the evidence that you're using to make your future decisions in reward-guided decision-making tasks, okay? So I'm going to try to describe you today a framework that we've built in my team over the last few years that we've used to try to study the effects of controllability on human learning under uncertainty, which is much, much more controlled than these two existing tasks. It would be very difficult to study the effects of controllability on human decision-making by comparing a bandit task to a random dot motion task. I think we all agree on that, right? So we used for this framework a very simple inference problem where subjects have to track a hidden state that alternates slowly and unpredictably between two values. So this is, for example, time on the horizontal axis, and you see, so there is a hidden state that can take two values that alternate slowly over time. The task is uncertain because the subjects don't observe directly the hidden state, but they only observe stimuli that provide probabilistic evidence for one or the other hidden state. And so basically, to get a clear idea of what the hidden state is, subjects have to perform inference to try to get to a more accurate representation of what the hidden belief is, right? And so in practice, what did we do to create the task? We use something, I don't know if it's fun or not, maybe I can get a clear idea after today, but so the task revolves on the categorization of stimuli that will be colored apples that subjects have essentially to categorize between two piles or two categories. You see on the left, the orange category that consists mostly of orange apples, and the blue category on the right, which consists mostly in blue apples. As you can see, the task is uncertain because the two piles contains all possible colors of apples, but only in different proportions. You see, this one has more orange, but some blue, and vice versa. So in a given trial of the task, subjects are going to be presented with a sequence of apples, and they will have to solve the task to try to categorize it. So for this purpose, they will have to extract the evidence provided by each apple in favor of the two categories, and essentially integrate this evidence over time to form a belief about whether the sequence was drawn from the orange or the blue category, right? So now the task consists of two conditions one uncontrollable condition, and another matched controllable condition. So in the uncontrollable condition, what we ask the subjects to do is simply to track the drawn category of the apples that they see on the screen, right? So to show you the generative structure of the task, for example, at trial t-1, it is the hidden state is blue. So we are drawing a blue sequence, a sequence of blue apples from the blue pile that you see. So subjects observe a sequence of apples, and they just press with a key whether they believe that the sequence is drawn from the blue or the orange category. As I said, the task is sequential, so on the next trial, it may still be the blue category that is being drawn, and on the subsequent trials, there is a reversal of the hidden state, meaning that now the computer is drawing the orange category, right? And so subjects will have, of course, it will not be mentioned to the subject that the reversal has occurred. They will only see the apples on the screen, and they will have to adapt their behavior. Now, and this happens for, let's say, 70 trials per block, right? And in the controllable condition, we use the exact same piles of apples, the same general task structure, but now the instruction is different. Now the subject, what they have to do is to try and press the blue drawing key, right? So in this condition now, the hidden state is different because it is the association between a given key press and a color that is drawn after that key press. So now, when the subject at this point in time in the task presses the left key, a blue sequence will be presented. If they press the right key, an orange sequence will be provided. And as you can see, I've reflected this instrumental control that subjects have by this arrow here. So now, the response of the subject on one chart determines, given the hidden state, the new color that will be presented on that chart, okay? So now the subject over time has to try, based only on the apples on the screen, to guess what is the key, in this case it is left at this time, that is drawing the instructed category, in this case blue. And you see over time, same as before, same as in the other condition, the state remains constant for a period of time and sometimes reverses to the other possible hidden state. So now you see, it is the right key that now draws from the target category, instructed one. And the subject will have, just like in the other condition, to adapt his or her behavior to these reversals, right? A good thing about these two conditions is that it is quite easy to generate two versions of the task, an uncontrollable condition and a controllable condition, that are tightly matched in terms of all experimental variables, right? So basically, you can create two mirrored versions of the same task where the belief that a Bayes observer, a Bayes optimal inference model would hold about the hidden state. So I'm presenting two mirrored versions of the task, one from the uncontrollable condition C- at the top and the controllable condition C+ at the bottom, where you can see over the course of one given block, so you have like 72 charts in the block, you see that the belief that the optimal model will have in the two conditions in favor of one or the other hidden state is exactly the same. So basically, we've created two versions of the same task that are equally uncertain, but one of them uses evidence that you can sample yourself. You have control over the evidence that you're sampling. The other one you don't, right? So we can now compare these two conditions to study the effects of controllability on learning under uncertainty in this very, very simple framework. So the first thing that you can plot in this task is what people call a reversal curve, right? So it's simply plotting over time around the reversal, which is in the middle here, how people adapt their behavior to the new hidden state, right? So as you can see, so this is the uncontrollable condition C-. You see that subjects very nicely, after a reversal of the hidden state, progressively adapt their behavior by now more and more reporting state S2 when it is now state S2 that is presented, right? So what's nice is that now I can plot on the exact same graph what happens in the controllable condition, and we can compare the two directly on the same plot instead of having a banded task on one hand and a random dot motion on the other hand that you couldn't compare whatsoever, okay? And you can see that the two curves are not perfectly aligned. It seems that subjects reverses their behavior more slowly in the controllable condition than in the other condition. So you can quantify this by fitting psychometric parameters to these reversal curves, and you can see that controllability seems to increase the reversal time constant in the task, but also increase the asymptotic performance that subjects reach at the end of episodes between two reversals. So to try to model these effects, we used a very simple hidden state inference process, the optimal one that I've discussed earlier, but where we added two sources of suboptimality. The first one is that subjects may misestimate the true reversal rate of the hidden state in the task. Okay, so we fitted a perceived reversal rate for each of the two conditions. The second source of suboptimality is the fact that maybe subjects perform inference not perfectly precisely, but imprecisely. So we have a second parameter, sigma, that controls how imprecise the inference process is. And when we fitted these two parameters to the two conditions, the good thing again is that instead of fitting an RL model to a bandit task and a drift diffusion model to a random dot motion task, here we can fit the exact same inference model to our controllable and uncontrollable conditions. And when we did that, we found that subjects seem to perceive the reversal rate of the controllable condition to be substantially lower than the reversal rate of the uncontrollable condition. This is despite the fact that the two conditions have the exact same reversal rate. As I said before, you have mirrored versions of the task in the two conditions where the reversals actually happen at exactly the same times in the two blocks, okay? And by contrast, the limited precision of the inference process was completely the same in the two conditions in our subjects. So this makes a clear prediction, is that participants are equally sensitive to the evidence that they can control and not control, but that they need more conflicting evidence to change their minds when they are in control of the evidence that they're sampling. And this is exactly what we found when we plotted the data in another way, where now we plotted the fraction of repetitions of the same decision as a function of the evidence provided in a sequence, from consistent sequences on the right, where people repeat essentially their previous decision, to conflicting decisions on the left, where now subjects are more switching away from their previous decisions. As you can see, the slopes of these two reversal curves is exactly the same, but the controllable one, the one that we get in the controllable condition, is shifted to the left, exactly as predicted by the model. So what we did is actually that we collected this behavior while subjects were performing the task in the MEG scanner. And today, in the interest of time, instead of just describing to you the neural correlates of inference in the two conditions, I'm going to try to show you how we tried to use the neural data, not to do brain mapping, but to use it as another observable that we can use to validate the prediction of our model. Basically, that controllability seems to stabilize the perceived reversal rate of the task, that subjects perceive the task as more stable in the controllable condition. So for that, we decoded two variables predicted by the model that are associated with each apple that we present to the subject. The first variable that we decoded from MEG activity was how much evidence is provided by one apple in the task. Okay, so this is what I call evidence train. And of course, this is a variable that just grows as a function of distance from the category boundary in the middle. You see these apples provide not so much evidence for one or the other category. These ones on the extremes provide a lot of evidence. So we decoded that variable from MEG activity, but also another variable, which I call evidence consistency, which is how much the apple that people see at one point in time is consistent or conflicting with their belief at that time. So if people hold the belief that the sequence is drawn from the orange category, this apple here would be very consistent with the belief, whereas this apple on the left would be very, very conflicting with the current belief, right? So we decoded these two variables, and we found that they're reflected basically in orthogonal linear projections of the MEG activity. So on the left, I'm showing you the cross-validated prediction for the MEG activity reflecting the strength of evidence. So you remember this V-shaped pattern. And what you see is that it is clearly reflected in MEG activity, and it is also highly similar between the two conditions. We also decoded this evidence consistency variable, the match between what you see and what you believe that you would get. And you see that you can also decode it very well from MEG activity. And again, that it's very, very similar between the two conditions. Now, what I would want you to remember right now is that actually the variable on the left, on the right, evidence consistency, is the match between the stimulus you're looking at and the belief you hold at that time. And because of that, it depends on the perceived reversal rate of the hidden state, because that variable controls your belief at one point in time. So basically, what we did is that we simulated for the same subject and the same block in the task, what would be the belief of a subject for very different values of the perceived reversal rate. All possible values from a subject, for example, that would perceive the task as highly volatile, and a subject that in the same conditions would perceive the task as highly stable. And basically what we did is that we created different variants of this evidence consistency variable as a function of all possible perceived reversal rates. And we fitted which of these perceived reversal rate values were leading to the maximal decoding of that variable in the MEG activity. Basically, we fitted the variable that we fitted in behavior, but now we fitted it only on brain activity. So we are using brain activity here just to fit this variable and check whether we find the same effect between the two conditions, which is that in the controllable condition, we expect that we would get a peak value that would be lower. And when we did that, that's what we found. We found that MEG activity, just like behavior, was suggesting that subjects perceive the reversal rate of the task to be lower when they have control over the evidence. So that's the first conclusion that I want to stress today, that it seems that humans in this simple task treat controllable environments as more stable than uncontrollable yet equally uncertain ones. Now, of course, the task generates the same amount of uncertainty in the two conditions, but there are different forms of uncertainty. This I can't deny, of course. And this difference is particularly critical around response switches. So in the C-, the uncontrollable condition, subjects switch because they want to report a change in the drawn category. They realize that now the computer is probably drawing another category, so they just report it. Now, in the controllable conditions, subjects switch because they want to sample evidence from the other action. They feel like, oh no, that button, that key, is not drawing from the target, the instructed category, so I should switch to another one. Okay? So while in the two conditions, these response switches happen when people change their minds about the hidden state, in the controllable condition, people are also switching because they seek information about an information source that they haven't sampled in the past, because of that control that we gave to the subjects. And so what we did is that the effects of response switches on brain activity in the controllable and the uncontrollable conditions to try to deconfound the signatures of information seeking that only happens in the controllable condition from the signatures of changes of mind that happens in both conditions. Okay, so here what I'm plotting on the screen is how alpha band power, so a very classical signal in MEG, EEG, electrophysiological signals, even LFPs, that is a reliable marker of visual attention. So we looked at how alpha band activity suppresses more in the trials that lead to a response switch than the trials leading to a response repetition. So on the left, I'm aligning the activity to the onset of the trial. Each of the vertical bar is an apple that was presented to the subject. And on the right now, it's aligned to the go signal that was probing the subject to provide a decision. Okay, so you see, so this curve says that in the uncontrollable condition, you see that there was a switch-specific suppression of alpha power leading in the trial, leading to the response switch. Now, what's interesting is that for the exact same contrast in the controllable condition, where we think information seeking is happening, this effect is twice larger. Okay, so that's interesting because it shows that beyond changes of mind, having control over the evidence leads to a much, much, much stronger attentional-like effect in the trials preceding the response switch. We didn't look only at MEG activity, we also looked at another signal that is related to arousal, that is an imperfect but previously described window onto the noradrenergic system, which is pupil dilation, the phasic signal. And so we looked at the same thing now in the pupil dilation activity. And so what we found is that unlike alpha band activity, you see there is no anticipatory effect, no pupil dilation before the response switches, but there is one right after it. And what we found is that in the controllable condition, this effect is again at least twice larger and extends much, much further in the next trial, where the subjects are basically evaluating the consequences of their decision. And just to show you, so this effect, this difference between the two conditions is only present in the trials that are leading to switches. The two conditions are not different at all in the trials that lead to a response repetition. So this second set of analysis suggests that controllability boosts the saliency in terms of attention and arousal of sensory events that are perceived as the consequences of one's own actions. So in the last minutes of the talk, I want to try and convince you that this task is not only relevant for studying the tiny bits and correlates of learning under uncertainty, but it may have some value for understanding obsessive compulsive disorder. So OCD is often characterized as the interaction between intrusive thoughts or obsessions and repetitive behavior or compulsions, right? So, and these effects are often quite specific. So for example, for a patient that has an obsession about a fear of contamination, they would engage in repetitive cleaning. And current theories suggest, or at least postulate, that pathological doubt is leading to this repetitive behavior. As you can see in this simple example, this is a clear instrumental case where people engage in cleaning because they believe that it could solve their contamination issue, right? So what we wonder is whether controllability may potentiate the effects or the cognitive deficits that we observe in OCD patients under uncertainty. So basically, even outside of their specific obsessions, right? So we used exactly the same task that I presented before in two groups of subjects, a group of clinically diagnosed OCD patients, 17 of them that we tested in the MEG scanner, and a group of non-clinical controls matched for age, level of education, etc. So just to show you very quickly, if you look at behavior, in the uncontrollable condition, OCD patients were perfectly capable of performing the task. You see, they have high sensitivity to the evidence provided, and they, of course, switch their behavior following sequences of apples that contradict or conflict with their beliefs. But interestingly, unlike non-clinical subjects, these patients showed decreased sensitivity to the presented evidence in the controllable condition, right? So we use the MEG data to try to understand what these differences may come from. And what we looked at is the decoding of evidence strength in the two conditions. We splitted it as a function of whether the evidence was consistent or conflicting with the patient's belief. And you see that in the uncontrollable conditions, the patients reflect the conflicting and consistent evidence equally well. But in the uncontrollable condition, on the right, in pink, you see that now the patients were down-weighting, were reflecting less well in their MEG activity, the evidence provided by conflicting evidence. So if I replot it, just like I was plotting it earlier in the talk, you see that in the uncontrollable condition, the evidence provided by the stimuli is reflected in a balanced fashion, it is symmetrical. But in the controllable condition, you see that it seems that the conflicting evidence is reflected much less accurately by the patient's brain activity. So I think maybe I'm done, right? No? I don't know. I can finish maybe 1 minute. Yeah. So in the model, because we observed that in the MEG activity, we added another source of suboptimality where we basically said that subjects may bias the category evidence that they get from the stimuli as a function of their current belief, right? So basically, we control this effect by just an imbalance parameter gap. And we found that in the OCD group, this effect was the most that was explaining most of patients' cognitive deficit in that condition. In the non-clinical group of subjects, it was, as I said earlier, a change in the perceived reversal rate that was explaining the difference between the uncontrollable and the controllable conditions. So basically, it means that the patients don't perceive the controllable environments as more stable than the uncontrollable ones, but that they downweight the evidence provided by conflicting evidence that is not consistent with what they believe, only when they have control over the evidence. This model predicts all of the effects we see, both behavior and brain activity. And if you want to think at why people may do this, what we studied with Jan Drogovic is that one possible computational explanation in Mars kind of way of describing it would be that patients are not only uncertain about the hidden state in the controllable task, but that they are also uncertain about how controllable the evidence that they are generating is. They have doubts as to whether they truly have control in this condition about the evidence that they are presented with, unlike non-clinical subjects. And so basically, we think that this study provides some bits of evidence that OCD may be better described as a disease of doubt, specifically regarding the controllability of action outcomes. So I'm just going to end here by thanking my funding source, of course, the subjects and patients for participating, and you for your attention. Thank you.